I'm about to tell you is top secret.
We meant what we said about changing the world.
A revolution needs a leader. Run, Barry, run!
Watching us right now.
What is that?
That's superhero age, Ford.
So fantastic.
The empire.
I always think I should just sit down after that and not actually say anything at all. But Wild Digital is actually it's actually becoming quite a tough presentation to give because this is our third year. And 3 years ago, we had just launched. We'd literally just launched. We're 2 weeks in with all the joyous naivety and ambition and complete ignorance about what was to come. And then last year, I opened with this. It was our first birthday. And we had a year of pain and learning and growth and excitement. And next week is actually our second birthday. And that image is not a bad way to capture where iflix is today. It's a screaming toddler running around in circles at 1,000 miles an hour with even bigger ambition and greater aspiration. Now, if you put into Google Images 2-year-old, what you actually get is this, bizarrely. And so I would never make a political comment, but I think Patrick already made it. You also get beautiful images like this. But if you search on ASEAN and 2-year-old, you actually get this. And so I don't know where it takes you. And so we always start iflix with this. It's $6.2 billion of consumer spending on pirated DVDs. Right? $6.2 billion. $6.2 billion of consumer spending. Right? And so iflix was founded on that. How do you get the world's best content and bring it to emerging markets at a price that everybody can afford? But if you've been to Wild Digital before, you know that. You know that. So rather than tell you that same old story, let me share the version that I heard from an investor recently. It's like a great American company went to Asia and had a wild night out, kind of like The Hangover. But then as we've got into the business, it became much, much more local. And I mean that in a nice way, that there's depth, there's connection, and that ultimately there is a new little baby born in the region. And this is genuine, but the point was not that. The point was, Mum and Dad went home, and they left the little baby to grow up in the markets. And what happens when you grow up in the markets is you don't grow up like Mum and Dad, right? You actually start hanging out with friends that are very, very local. And you start doing super, super cool local things. Now, last year, well, actually, this is the greatest example. This is called a jeepney. Do you know what a jeepney is? This is a military jeep that the US left in the Philippines, right? And over the process of geopolitical turmoil, the US largely left the Philippines and they left these military jeeps. And so they have been completely and utterly pimped out. And you choose your jeepney based on the coolest, sexiest imagery, right? And Philippines is a market which for a global company people don't care about because the internet sucks, right? It's one of the world's worst internet companies on any set of metrics, but it's also 100 million people. And we often share this image, and I shared this last year at Wild Digital, as a symbol of how much we see the world changing with smartphones. So this is an image, 2005, for anyone who wasn't here last year, standing at the back of the Vatican at the benediction of Pope Benedict. right? 2005. Same image at the benediction of Pope Francis 8 years later. My God, hasn't the world changed, right? But actually, what's more extraordinary is in Manila. The picture looks exactly the same. And every one of these smartphones, 60 million smartphones in Manila, have supercomputers now in their hand. And that's basically now what gets iflix out of bed. We don't think about India and we don't think about China. We think they're markets that are done very, very well. So we think about the addressable market other than those. We grow from roughly 600 million people now to 1.3 billion people in the emerging markets, middle class, over the next 5 years. Almost all the GDP growth globally between now and 2050 comes out of the emerging markets, middle class. On the content side, what's going on in our business is fascinating. So on the left-hand side is a slide which is the growth in the creation of content. So on the one hand, there is a new golden media age, which is extraordinary. On the right-hand side is what's happening with viewing. Now, if you read the newspapers in Australia, here, anywhere, what you hear is linear television viewing is down by about 2 to 3%. What you miss is actually there's a much more interesting story. The interesting story is that if you're older, roughly 50 to over 65, this boom in the creation of content means I'm actually watching more television than ever before. The reason they don't tell you that is because it's not a great market for advertising. So no one tells you that basic television is becoming an old person's game. What's more interesting is if you're 18 to 24. If you're 18 to 24, you're basically watching half of the television that you did 5 years ago, and if you follow that trajectory out on a linear basis, you hit zero at some point around 2020. And the way we watch television is fundamentally changing. So if you look at the African subcontinent, this is the device world, right? And the coolest thing is this is about smartphones, and all these smartphones just went up in the air to take a photo of pictures about smartphones. Television sets are basically flat, right? There's slight growth, but nowhere near the population or demographic growth. Pay television is a business which is not going to get to scale, but the mobile market is becoming mass market in every respect. And so what's extraordinary is if you're born into a world with a mobile in your hand, it looks something like this. The reason I look like shit is not iflix. I have an 8-year-old son, right? And I committed to his mum that we would get him in the presentation somehow. And I get that Felix, his name, is too early for Peppa Pig. But think about the world of not, I used to watch linear television and mum and dad watch linear television, but think about this generation of kids who are born into the world, they will never, ever watch linear television. So when we look at that market, over the next 5 years, it's about 1.3 billion people have a mobile phone and a mobile broadband subscription. We think about 20% of them can afford about $2 to $3 a month on the most conservative level. Why $2 to $3 a month? That's the price of a pirated DVD. It's an $8 billion revenue opportunity. And so that's iflix's vision, to lead the entertainment revolution for emerging markets globally, for the next billion people. And the first time we shared that was actually at Wild Digital last year. And in that time, we've moved from what was 4 countries and about 1.2 million customers to now having over 650 people with offices in 27 cities. We have 45 people in Myanmar who do local content ingestion, who do local curation into Myanmar language. We have 16 people in Ghana. We have teams in Nigeria that are working with local community churches to actually digitize the gospel messages from a Sunday because it's a 99% Christian country. And over the last 12 months, this is just in our Asian business. We're now at just over 3.8 million paying customers. And every day we're streaming about 46 years worth of content, 80% of which is going to a mobile phone. So US comparison is a little bit scary, but just in the Asian business that we have, and this data is a little bit old, is iflix just became the 4th largest premium video company in the world. Before Middle East, before Africa. We launched the Middle East last week. We now have 50,000 customers in the Middle East. We haven't started yet. 16 of those are from Iraq. 4,000 of those are from Sudan. And this morning, we're switching on the service in Africa. So just returning to this example of when you grow up in a local environment, what you realize is even from an iflix leadership perspective, the cultural biases that I brought to this business, I look back and just realize the extraordinary ignorance that we had. Because what's driving iflix is not this stuff. It's actually not even the stuff that you see in the big show reels, right? It's not the stuff that wins mass market ratings and gets all the attention. It's not the kids stuff that you see on premium paid television. 8 out of the top 10 shows in every single market is local. So, in the Philippines, it's Encantadia, which is a fantasy show set with amazing local casts. Korean is its own phenomena. But we're starting to reach new markets. We're the #1 pirated show in Ghana. From a physical piracy perspective, is Legend of the Deep Blue Sea. The #1 physical pirated show in Ghana is Legend of the Deep Blue Sea. The #1 show in Myanmar is a beautiful Thai movie called From Bangkok to Mandalay. In Africa, it's local adaptations of US shows. And that has been the tremendous... I didn't even say anything. And the #1 feature is not what it was for mum and dad. It's not algorithmic recommendations that are pointing out the next best show to watch. It's 50 to 60 local celebrities in every single country that are curating playlists and recommending it to their 30 million followers. So I think, actually, we're entering into a new phase of the internet. When I used to work at Microsoft, I had this theory, and Patrick and I started working kind of 10 years ago, this theory about how the internet worked. And the first deal we ever did was to set up MSN in Malaysia, because I thought what happened was there were big, world-class global companies that did things on a world-class basis. And then there was great local execution. They were the two models that I always saw for the internet. Now I think we're talking about something fundamentally different. Whether it's Gojek, whether it's GrabTaxi, whether it's Garena, whether it's Unlocked and the way they're executing. I think we're entering a new phase, which is we have world-class businesses and world-class technology executed very, very locally and executed everywhere. So, thank you for listening to iflix for the 3rd time. The good news is that if all the rest of the presentations in the next 2 days bore the hell out of you, if you reach under your chair at some point, don't do it now because it will be rude, but if you reach under your chair, there's a 60-day voucher for iflix. And you can just binge watch like crazy, and welcome to the revolution. Thank you, guys.